Bob Baer is here. He spent 20 years running agents from inside the CIA's Directorate of Operations, developing intelligence on Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations. His previous books include See No Evil and Sleeping with the Devil. His new book is a novel. It's called Blow the House Down. I'm pleased to welcome back Robert Baer to this table. Bob, welcome very much. And in the interest of full disclosure, you and I worked together. You were a consultant at ABC News, and we went into Baghdad in the days right after the fall of that city, when everyone was giddy about the easy victory. And I recall you telling me then this was not what it seemed to be.
No, you could, yeah. What I knew back then, and what's clear today, and I don't like being right, is that Saddam was the glue that held this country together. The Iraqi army was. And you and I, when we were driving into Baghdad, saw those tanks at the holes in them. And I said, Brian, who's going to hold this country together? We'd see the American soldiers. They couldn't speak Arabic. They didn't know the conflict that goes back thousands of years between these people. We can't ask them to do it, and they can't hold it together. And unfortunately, my predictions were pretty much on.
So what's the answer today, given the situation on the ground there now?
You know, Brian, we can't win as we're going now. We're going to have to completely reformulate our exit strategy on this. We're going to probably have to bring in the Iranians. As much as I dislike and distrust the Iranians, we're going to have to bring in the Saudis, the Jordanians, and the Turks. There's going to have to be an international peacekeeping force in there to hold this country together. We can't ask the Marines to do it like we're doing now.
Not fair to the Marines?
It's not fair. These guys, I mean, they're going to end up being tried for murder. It looks like they're guilty, but it wasn't fair to them. It's not what they're trained to do. That's not what they were told to do. They were put in the worst possible situation.
As a CIA officer, you ran at least one attempted plot to throw Saddam out. That failed, but you tried it. Was that a mistake as you look at it now?
No, I don't think it was a mistake, because what we understood back then was the goal was not to invade or occupy the country or impose democracy. It was to remove Saddam, because he's nuts. And his two sons, who are now dead, were nuts. And we had to get rid of the regime in order to stabilize that part of the world. But what we were going to do is leave the military in charge, put a new general in, a Saddam light, if you like, that would take the country over.
So a coup would have been better than an invasion?
Absolutely. We could have dealt with a new general in Iraqi terms. We would have let the Iraqis evolve into their own democracy at their own speed. We would have demanded, some adherence to human rights, getting rid of weapons of mass destruction, and the rest of it.
And now Iran seems to be benefiting from all of this.
Iran won.
Iran won.
Look, they've got the South. They've got a legitimate government, which is beholden to Iran. And what scares me now, which I write about in this book, is the Iranians are looking at this as the Shia millennium. For thousands of years, since the beginning, or 680 if you want to be precise, they were dispossessed of any power. And all of a sudden, Iran, and especially the new president, says, hey, we won the war in Iraq. The Americans are going to get tired of this. They're going to leave. We're going to have the Shia are going to be aligned to us. And we're going to start putting pressure on the Arab governments in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia in particular. And we see that now. We see Ahmadinejad sending envoys to Saudi Arabia and to Qatar and to Bahrain saying, you guys picked the wrong side. If, for instance, we get hit by American missiles, we're going to come take your oil facilities out. Now, whether they can or not is a different question.
But the Iranians are rattling their sabers.
They're pushing hard. This is the Shia millennium. We won. We are the inheritors of the mantle of Islam. I mean, this is the kind of talk that's going on in the Middle East.
And so what is U.S. policy? How is it best served? What do we do?
Well, here's the problem, is that Ahmadinejad is probably crazy in our terms. He's talking about, he denies the Holocaust. He was a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He was involved in Lebanon at the time I write this book. He probably was involved in kidnappings, maybe a couple murders.
He was part of that Quds force.
The Quds force, they're dangerous. They were involved in the Marines. They are the ones that have first negotiated with the Palestinians to do Pan Am 103. They were involved in TW 847. I go through a whole litany of operations they were involved in, directly planning and executing these operations, and he was part of that. Look at him as he's akin to a colonel from the SS in 1945. Would you want him in charge of Germany? No. Unfortunately, the unintended consequences of Iraq is he is president of Iran, and he's picking up power. You look at the New York Times, they've covered this. He's got military force behind him, and he's determined to go to war with the United States for various reasons.
That's what you think? He is determined to have a war with the United States?
I think he welcomes a war. It unifies Iran. The revolution, the Islamic Revolution, is running out of steam. You've got a problem in Iran with Sunni Muslims. They're a minority, but they're unhappy, and some of them are allying with bin Laden. The economy is in shambles. Unemployment's high. But more than that, he's a believer. He's an apocalyptic Shia who believes that he needs to fight evil, which is the United States and Israel. If a lot of Iranians die in the course of it, they're going to go. They're going to be martyrs. They're going to go to heaven.
And do you think the U.S. is looking for a war from what you have seen? You're just back from that region.
No, I think that Condi Rice and the president understand the dangers of a war with Iran. But at the same time, they're getting pressure from Israel, who's saying, look, we cannot afford to run the risk of a madman in Tehran with Israeli and American blood on his hands with a nuclear bomb, because he will pull the trigger.
How is our intelligence inside Iran?
Spotty. Some of it's very good. We know about the Quds Force. We know about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In fact, it's set up, in effect, a parallel state to the clerics. It's a military force. We know pretty well what their plans are in the Gulf.
We have human intelligence, you think?
And it's other kinds of intelligence. There's good intelligence. It's not bad. And this is what scares the White House. Our intelligence on Iran is better than it is or was on Iraq.
So we actually have a better sense of what's happening there.
And we know they're going for a nuclear bomb.
And now that we know it, we know where they're going. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Now coming up on the 5-year anniversary of the September 11th attacks, bin Laden has been more active than we've seen him in almost 3 or 4 years. More and more tapes, quick response. He responded to the conviction of Nasawi within 2 weeks after the sentencing. He seems to be current. Is he desperate to be heard, or does he actually have control and command of his operation?
He's desperate to be heard. You know, he's threatened to attack the United States in tapes. He hasn't done anything.
You take comfort in that?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, he's running out of steam. He doesn't have command and control over this organization.
The fact that he hasn't been caught, does that matter at this point? Even as a matter of just symbolic capture, or
not really. I mean, it's an irritant to us all. But he's probably most likely, the simplest explanation is he's in the mountains of Pakistan, somewhere up there being protected by tribes, which has always been off limit to the West. This is Indian country, you know, back to the British. You just can't go up there and grab somebody. You know, we can't blame the U.S. military. You can't get helicopters in there. You can't get armor in. Intelligence is bad up in that area. I think he's fairly irrelevant. The real relevance is these forces in Iraq and the confrontation between the Shia and the Sunni and the risk of a regional war.
Let me ask you about your former employer, the CIA. What do you make of the new director, General Hayden?
You know, I'm going to go against the grain. So far, I like him. One, he's a general. He can take on Rumsfeld. He knows the Pentagon. He's coming from the National Security Agency, which knows intelligence. National Security Agency's got some of the best intelligence in the U.S. government. So as he walks through the doors of the CIA, he's got a background. He's been saying the right things. He said, you know, the amateur hour is over. The CIA is going to be based on competence alone, and we're going to get back to business, which I like. Let's give him a chance. And Steve Kappas, the proposed deputy, is a former colleague of mine. He had a great reputation. He speaks Farsi, he speaks Russian. He's run good cases. He wasn't afraid to take on Porter Goss. He stood with his principles and resigned before he'd be part of this bloodletting inside the CIA. So the team put in place has got some chances to rebuild the place. I like it.
You've talked to people who are still inside.
Talked to people still inside, and they like it. You know, he was at the CIA, General Hayden was, and he got a standing ovation, his speech. I think the signs are good.
And what does he have to do now to restore credibility to the CIA and restore its ability to provide useful intelligence that is not in any way filtered by the politicians?
He's got to go back to the analytical side of the CIA. saying that, listen, you guys cannot be influenced by politics anymore. The vice president shows up at the CIA and demands a certain assessment, ignore it.
Can General Hayden say no?
I think so.
We talked late last year about the CIA's interrogation techniques, which include 7 steps. The most violent of them, I guess you'd say, would be waterboarding, where someone's held upside down, and it's a kind of torture, a mock execution. That still goes on. You disapproved at the time?
It still goes on. I disapprove of it, and I disapprove it more now because I've now spent doing a documentary for a British television company. I've spent a total of a month in Israeli jails. The Israelis, proportionally, are suffering more from terrorism than anybody. They don't torture.
They don't torture.
They don't put pressure. I've talked to the prisoners that have been in. Even under a ticking clock situation, they don't torture. It's counterproductive. They don't get the information. They alienate people. And what they use is just good intelligence. And they keep people that are experienced around. And they've undone a lot of plots. They're amazing, and they don't use torture. And it's amazing the way they just let the prisons open to the press. I mean, you can go in there. You could go in next week and spend as long as you wanted. They're talking to these prisoners.
But in your experience, when you were with the CIA, did not the Israelis use torture?
They did for a long time, but they found it was a mistake. They were much more effective using competent intelligence officers assigned to a subject, listening to telephones, arresting people, doing searches, and all the normal techniques without using torture.
Even what you call the ticking time bomb, when the bomb's about to go off in 4 hours, you have to find out.
The problem is this isn't 24. You know, you don't ever get people to confess when they're under torture. They will confess. They'll turn in their mothers if they have to. But it's usually bad information. And the Israelis asked me, why are you guys using these techniques? You know, we tried them. They don't work. And I don't think they work. And it also, besides that, is the bad publicity. And that's not us. We're not Americans. We don't like this stuff.
Investigations going on at the CIA. Who was talking to reporters? People have been fired. Reporters under investigation. The Attorney General is saying perhaps reporters should go to jail for publishing classified information.
I've had senior officers in the last 6 months come to me and said to me, what is the advantage of going public and what's not? And these are people like ex-Marines and people that would never talk.
But considering it.
Considering going to the press and just letting loose of what's going on, even at the risk of criminal prosecution.
When you were with the CIA, did you ever consider?
I ran from reporters. If I were in a cocktail party and saw somebody, an American reporter, I ran the other way. Wouldn't talk to them.
And how about your book now? What kind of clearance do you have to publish a book? This is a novel. This is fiction. You still have to submit it for?
This was submitted. I originally proposed submitting this in nonfiction. It's about Iran and terrorism and covering up this over the years.
It started as nonfiction.
Started as nonfiction, and the CIA laughed. They said, try it in a novel. And this is what I've done. There's a lot of truth here. And I'll tell you up front, I'm going to leave the reader in suspense what's true and what's not. If you ask me what's true, I'll tell you. But I'll tell. There's real people in here. There's John O'Neill. You knew of John O'Neill. Sure. He's in here. I knew him as well. John Millis, one friend of mine in the CIA, was found dead in a hotel room in Northern Virginia, his head blown off. He was the last guy in Peshawar when bin Laden was there. He was Porter Goss, the CIA director's chief of staff when he was on the House. I bring these people in. I bring it in for authenticity. I bring in tradecraft, and then weave a plot, which I hope is going to pull the reader through it.
But a plot
page turner.
A plot you feel has credibility in terms of.
It has a lot of credibility. Listen, Brian, this I've been allowed to clear in my first book, See No Evil. In 1996, Osama bin Laden sat down with an Iranian intelligence officer, and they made an agreement to carry out terrorism in the United States, the two of them together. This is not the
You're telling us that as a fact?
As a fact.
That's a fact.
It's a fact. There's as good as intelligence as there is.
You knew that from your work at the CIA?
I knew it from the CIA. I don't know what exactly happened after that, but it's a mystery, and I've taken this mystery and put it in this book, that they actually cooperated. Now, you look at the 9/11 Commission, and they said the Iranian connection has got to be looked into. But we are curious, how did 9 of the suicide bombers get into Tehran, were accompanied by Iranian intelligence to the border in Afghanistan? What did the Iranians do? Why did the mastermind stash his wife in Iran? And these meetings, and I'm taking all these pieces together, dots as we say in the game, and trying to connect them in this book.
So there's much in here that is based on what you knew as a CIA.
Oh, absolutely, and I tell you right now, and I am not advocating a war with Iran, but a lot of the plotting points to the Iranian president. Points. I mean, I don't want to indict him. I'm not advocating anything.
How about a coup? You were a master of coups at the CIA.
I saw an Arab head of state last week, and he said, listen, fine, go after Iran if you have to, but you better decapitate the regime. Otherwise, they're going to come get us. They're going to take our oil out. He was very categorical about it. If you go in there and take out the nuclear facilities in the Elburz Mountains or, hit a few facilities, take out their submarines, that's not enough. They'll come get us. You and I will be paying, if we fail in Iran, oil at $300 or $400 a barrel. This is their estimates.
So as if there are not enough problems with Iraq, Iran now looms as even perhaps potentially larger problem.
I think we are closer to a third world war. That's too much, but a regional war than we've been in the Middle East since 1967, a major regional war.
Bob Baer, thank you very much for being
here. Thanks for having me,
Look
Brian.
forward to seeing the book. It's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me.